You're just the cook. Nothing more. Those were the first words Caleb Rowan spoke to Eliza Moore when she arrived at his ranch with nothing but a worn carpet bag and a heart already shattered by loss. She'd answered his advertisement expecting coldness. She'd known enough of it since her husband died, but she never imagined that his 6-year-old daughter would change everything. The moment Maggie whispered, "Can you tuck me in too?" Eliza's carefully built walls began to crumble. What she didn't know was that saving this broken family would nearly cost her everything. If you want to see how Eliza transforms this house of silence into a home of hope, stay with me until the very end. And please, hit that like button and leave a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels across the world. The stagecoach lurched to a stop, sending up a cloud of Wyoming dust that hung in the late afternoon light like a curtain between Eliza Moore and her uncertain future. She pressed one gloved hand against the window frame, steadying herself as the driver's rough voice called out that this was as far as he went. The Rowan Ranch lay another 2 miles up the rutted path that disappeared into the rolling grasslands ahead. Eliza gathered her carpet bag. Everything she owned in the world fit into that single piece of worn leather, and stepped down onto the hard-packed earth. The May sun was warm on her shoulders, but it did nothing to chase away the chill that had settled into her bones over the past 6 months. 6 months since Thomas died. 6 months since the fever took him in 3 brutal days, leaving her with nothing but debts and the cold judgment of a town that had no use for a childless widow of 24. The stagecoach pulled away, its wheels grinding against stone and soil, and Eliza stood alone beneath the vast blue dome of the sky. Wyoming was different from Ohio, wider, emptier, more honest in its indifference. Back home, people had whispered their cruelty behind raised hands and closed doors. Here, the land didn't bother with pretense. It simply was what it was, beautiful, harsh, and utterly unforgiving to those who came unprepared. She adjusted the pins in her dark blonde hair, tucked a loose strand behind her ear, and began walking. The advertisement she'd answered had been brief to the point of coldness. Cook needed, room and board, no children, no expectations. See Rowan Ranch, Wyoming Territory. She'd written back immediately, her letter careful and measured, listing her experience in the kitchen and her willingness to work hard. His response had come 3 weeks later, just as terse. Position available. Arrived by May 15th. Wages discussed upon arrival. It wasn't a warm welcome, but it was a lifeline, and Eliza had learned not to expect warmth from the world anymore. The walk took longer than she'd anticipated. Her boots, already worn thin from too many miles, raised blisters on her heels. The carpet bag grew heavier with each step, though it couldn't have weighed more than 20 pounds. By the time she crested the final rise and saw the ranch spread out below her, the sun had begun its slow descent toward the western mountains, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. The Rowan Ranch was larger than she'd imagined. The main house stood 2 stories tall, built of timber and stone, with a wide porch that wrapped around the front and eastern side. Barns and outbuildings scattered across the property. A stable, a smokehouse, what looked like a bunkhouse for ranch hands. Cattle grazed in distant pastures, and she could hear the faint sounds of men's voices carrying across the open space, though she couldn't see them yet. Eliza paused at the edge of the property, suddenly aware of how she must look. Dusty, tired, her traveling dress creased and stained from days of hard travel. She'd sold most of her good clothes to pay Thomas's debts, keeping only what she needed. Pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. She walked toward the main house, her footsteps echoing on the wooden porch steps. Before she could knock, the door swung open. The man who stood in the doorway was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the kind of physical presence that came from years of hard labor. His dark hair was cut short, showing the first hints of silver at the temples, and his face was weathered by sun and wind into sharp, uncompromising lines. But it was his eyes that struck her most, gray as storm clouds, assessing her with an intensity that made her want to look away. "Mrs. Moore?" It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir. Mr. Rowan, I presume?" He nodded once, his expression unchanging. "You're late. I expected you 2 days ago. The stage was delayed and I didn't ask for an explanation." His voice was level, neither warm nor particularly cold, simply stating facts. I asked you to be here by the 15th. Today is the 17th. Eliza felt heat rise to her cheeks, but she kept her voice steady. I apologize. I came as quickly as I could. For a long moment, he simply looked at her, and she had the uncomfortable feeling of being measured against some internal standard she couldn't see. Then he stepped back, opening the door wider. Come in. We'll discuss terms. The interior of the house was dim after the bright sunlight, and Eliza had to blink several times before her eyes adjusted. The front room was spacious but Spartan, furniture that was functional rather than decorative, walls bare except for a single landscape painting above the stone fireplace. Everything was clean but somehow lifeless, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Caleb Rowan gestured toward a straight-back chair near the unlit fireplace. Sit. Eliza sat, placing her carpet bag at her feet, and waited while he remained standing. It was a deliberate choice, she realized, a way of maintaining dominance in the conversation. She'd seen Thomas use the same tactic with men who owed him money. I'll be direct, Mrs. Moore. I need someone who can cook for myself, my daughter, and 6 ranch hands. 3 meals a day, 7 days a week. You'll have Sundays after lunch to yourself. Room and board provided. There's a small bedroom off the kitchen that's yours. Wages are $30 a month. $30 was more than fair for a cook's position, especially one that included room and board. Eliza nodded. That's acceptable. I'm not finished. His gray eyes never left her face. You're here to cook, nothing more. You don't discipline my daughter. You don't make decisions about the running of this household, and you don't involve yourself in matters that don't concern you. The ranch hands eat in the bunkhouse. You'll prepare their meals and leave them in the warming oven. They don't come into this house. Is that clear? Perfectly clear, Mr. Rowan. Good. One more thing. He crossed his arms over his chest and his voice dropped slightly, taking on a harder edge. My daughter has been through a difficult time. Her mother died 2 years ago. She's fragile. She doesn't need another woman coming in here trying to replace what she lost. You'll be kind to her. You'll feed her properly, but you won't try to be something you're not. Am I understood? Eliza felt something tighten in her chest. Whether anger or sorrow, she couldn't quite tell. Mr. Rowan, I'm a widow myself. I understand loss, and I understand boundaries. You've hired me as a cook, and that's what I'll be. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, perhaps? Or maybe just a reassessment. But it was gone before she could identify it, replaced by that same impassive mask. When can you start? Now, if you like. I assume someone needs to prepare dinner. For the first time, the corner of his mouth twitched upward. Not quite a smile, but close. The kitchen's through there. He pointed toward a doorway to the right. Maggie's in her room upstairs. She knows you're coming. I've got work to finish before dark. He headed toward the front door, then paused. Mrs. Moore? The pantry's well stocked. Use what you need. And then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a solid thunk that seemed to emphasize the emptiness of the house. Eliza sat for a moment longer, letting out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. So that was Caleb Rowan, wealthy, brusque, and clearly determined to keep everyone at arm's length. The kind of man who'd built walls so high, he'd forgotten what it was like to let anyone over them. Well, she'd dealt with difficult men before. She picked up her carpet bag and made her way to the kitchen, pushing through the heavy wooden door into a space that immediately felt more welcoming than the rest of the house. The kitchen was large, with windows facing east and south that let in warm afternoon light. A cast-iron stove dominated one wall, well-maintained and radiating stored heat. Work surfaces lined the other walls, and the pantry, when she opened it, proved to be exactly as promised, well-stocked with flour, cornmeal, beans, preserved vegetables, and even some luxury items like sugar and coffee. Someone had taken care to prepare for her arrival, even if Caleb Rowan himself seemed determined to keep her at a distance. Eliza set down her bag in the small bedroom just off the kitchen, barely large enough for a narrow bed, a dresser, and a washstand, but clean and private, and returned to begin her work. She tied on an apron she found hanging by the door, washed her hands in the basin, and assessed what she had to work with. 2 hours until dinner needed to be ready. She decided on something simple but satisfying. Beef stew with root vegetables, fresh biscuits, and dried apple pie for dessert. It was the kind of meal that would feed working men without being fancy, comfort food that would fill bellies and, she hoped, begin to build trust. She was peeling potatoes when she heard the soft creak of footsteps on the stairs. Eliza turned to find a small figure standing in the kitchen doorway. The girl couldn't have been more than 6 years old, with dark hair like her father's but softer features, a heart-shaped face with wide, uncertain brown eyes. She wore a simple blue dress that looked recently pressed, and her hands were clasped tightly in front of her as if she wasn't sure whether she should be there. "Hello," Eliza said gently, setting down her knife. "You must be Maggie." The girl nodded but didn't speak. "I'm Mrs. Moore, but you can call me Miss Eliza if you'd like." She smiled, keeping her movements slow and unthreatening. "Would you like to help me peel potatoes?" Maggie hesitated, then shook her head, but she didn't leave. Instead, she moved a little closer, her eyes taking in every detail of Eliza's face and dress. "That's all right. You can just keep me company if you want." Eliza returned to her work, aware of the child's intense scrutiny, but not wanting to make her self-conscious about it. "I'm making stew for dinner. It was one of my husband's favorite meals." "Your husband?" Maggie's voice was soft, barely above a whisper. "Yes, his name was Thomas. He died last year." The girl was quiet for a long moment. Then, "My mama died too." Eliza's hand stilled on the potato she was holding. She looked at Maggie, really looked at her, and saw the same grief she'd been carrying for 6 months reflected in those young eyes. "I know, sweetheart. Your father told me. I'm very sorry." "Papa doesn't talk about her anymore." The words were spoken without accusation, just a simple statement of fact, but they hit Eliza like a physical blow. She set down the potato and dried her hands on her apron, then crouched down so she was at eye level with the child. "Sometimes," she said carefully, "when people lose someone they love very much, talking about them hurts too much. So they keep quiet instead, but that doesn't mean they've forgotten. It just means the hurt is still very fresh." Maggie studied her with those two old eyes. "Does it hurt you to talk about your husband?" "Yes," Eliza admitted, "but I talk about him anyway because I don't want to forget him, and because talking about the people we've lost helps keep them with us, in a way." The girl considered this. Then, without warning, she took a step forward and wrapped her small arms around Eliza's neck. It was a brief embrace, over almost as soon as it began, but it left Eliza's eyes burning with unshed tears. "I think you're nice," Maggie whispered, then turned and ran from the kitchen before Eliza could respond. Eliza stayed crouched on the floor for a long moment, one hand pressed to her chest where her heart was beating too fast. She hadn't expected this, hadn't expected the immediate connection with this grieving child, hadn't expected to feel anything except the numb professionalism she'd cultivated over the past months. But Maggie Rowan had just broken through her carefully maintained distance with nothing more than a question and a hug. "Oh no," Eliza thought. "This is dangerous." Caleb Rowan had been clear. Don't get attached. Don't try to replace what was lost. But how was she supposed to maintain that distance when his daughter was clearly starving for connection? When those brown eyes held the same grief and loneliness that Eliza saw in her own mirror every morning? She stood, wiping roughly at her eyes, and returned to the potatoes. She would do her job. She would cook and clean and maintain proper boundaries. But she wouldn't be cold to that child. She couldn't be. Whatever Caleb Rowan thought about attachment and replacement, his daughter needed more than just food on a plate. The stew came together beautifully, the kitchen filling with rich, savory aromas as the beef and vegetables simmered together. The biscuits rose golden and perfect in the oven. The apple pie cooled on the windowsill, its crust flaky and inviting. By the time the dinner hour arrived, Eliza had prepared and set out the ranch hand's meal in the warming oven as instructed. She'd set the kitchen table for 3 with simple but clean dishes, and she'd changed from her dusty traveling dress into the one clean work dress she'd kept, brushing out her hair and repinning it into a simple bun. Caleb appeared precisely at 6 o'clock, his face and hands freshly washed, his expression as unreadable as before. Maggie came down moments later, slipping quietly into her chair. "Smells good," Caleb said, which might have been the highest compliment he was capable of giving. Eliza served them both, then fixed her own plate and sat down. For a few minutes, the only sound was the scrape of silverware against dishes. The stew, if she did say so herself, had turned out well, The meat tender, the vegetables perfectly cooked, the broth rich with flavor. "This is excellent, Mrs. Moore." Caleb's voice held a note of genuine surprise. "Thank you, Mr. Rowan. Papa, can Miss Eliza read me a story after dinner?" Maggie's question was directed at her father, but her eyes were on Eliza. Caleb's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Mrs. Moore has work to do. She doesn't have time for stories." "Actually," Eliza heard herself say, despite her better judgment, "I'd be happy to, if you don't mind, Mr. Rowan. After I've cleaned up the kitchen, of course." The look he gave her was sharp enough to cut glass. "I thought we were clear about boundaries, Mrs. Moore." "We were, but I don't see how reading a child a story before bed crosses any boundaries. It's a kindness, not an attempt to replace anyone." The silence that followed was thick with tension. Maggie's eyes moved between the two adults, her small face anxious. Eliza held Caleb's gaze, refusing to back down, even as her heart hammered in her chest. Finally, Caleb set down his fork. "One story, nothing more. And Maggie, you go to sleep right after. Understand?" The girl's face lit up with a smile that transformed her entirely. "Yes, Papa. Thank you." The rest of the meal passed in careful neutrality. Caleb asked no personal questions and volunteered no information about himself. Eliza kept the conversation focused on practical matters: what time meals should be served, dietary preferences, whether there were any special occasions coming up that would require extra cooking. When dinner ended, Caleb excused himself to check on the livestock one final time before dark. Maggie helped Eliza clear the table, chattering now about her favorite stories and her cat that lived in the barn, and how she'd learned to rope a fence post just last week. "Your father must be very proud," Eliza said as she washed dishes in the basin. "I don't know. He doesn't say." Maggie dried a plate carefully, her small face serious again. "He used to smile more, before Mama died. Now he mostly just works." Eliza's hand stilled in the warm water. "Grief does different things to different people, sweet girl. Some people cry, some people get angry, some people just keep moving, because if they stop, they're afraid they'll fall apart. Which kind are you?" The question was so direct, so honest, that Eliza couldn't help but smile even as tears pricked her eyes again. "I'm the kind who keeps moving, just like your papa." Maggie nodded as if this made perfect sense. "That's why he hired you, I think, because you understand." Out of the mouths of babes, Eliza thought, maybe this 6-year-old had more wisdom than either of the adults in this house. After the dishes were done and the kitchen tidied, Eliza followed Maggie upstairs to her bedroom. It was a sweet room, painted pale yellow, with lace curtains and a bed covered in a beautiful quilt. But like the rest of the house, it felt somehow empty. Toys lined up too neatly on shelves, books stacked with military precision, everything in its place but nothing lived in. "Which story would you like?" Eliza asked, examining the small bookshelf. "The one about the princess who saves herself." Eliza smiled and pulled out a worn copy of a fairy tale collection. She settled into the chair beside Maggie's bed and began to read, her voice soft and steady in the quiet room. The story was about a princess imprisoned in a tower who learned to weave rope from her own hair, creating a ladder to freedom. It was a good story, one about resourcefulness and courage rather than waiting for rescue. Maggie listened intently, her eyes growing heavier as the story progressed. By the time Eliza reached the end, the girl was yawning. "Time for sleep now," Eliza said, closing the book. "Miss Eliza?" Maggie's voice was drowsy. "Will you tuck me in?" Eliza's breath caught. This was exactly what Caleb had warned against, crossing boundaries, trying to be something she wasn't. But how could she refuse such a simple request? How could she deny this grieving child a moment of comfort? She stood and pulled the quilt up to Maggie's chin, smoothing it gently. "There you go, all tucked in." "Thank you." Maggie's eyes were already closing. "I'm glad you're here." Eliza felt something crack open inside her chest, something she'd kept carefully locked away since Thomas died. "So am I, sweetheart. So am I." She was halfway to the door when Maggie spoke again, her voice barely audible. "Can you tuck me in tomorrow too?" Eliza turned back, looking at the small figure already half asleep in the bed. Tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that. A series of tomorrows stretching out into an uncertain future. each one an opportunity to either maintain safe distance or risk connection. "We'll see," she said softly, though in her heart she already knew the answer. She closed the door quietly and made her way back downstairs, her mind churning. The kitchen was dark except for the glow of banked coals in the stove. She lit a lamp and sat down at the table, suddenly exhausted. This was supposed to be simple. She was supposed to cook, keep her head down, save money, and eventually move on to what? She didn't know. She'd been so focused on escaping Ohio, on finding any lifeline that would pull her away from the suffocating judgment and memories, that she hadn't thought beyond this moment. But now there was Maggie, with her brown eyes full of unspoken sadness, and her simple requests that shouldn't have felt so weighted with meaning. And there was Caleb Rowan, stern and distant, building walls to protect himself and his daughter from any more hurt. Eliza knew all about walls. She'd built enough of her own. The front door opened and closed, and she heard Caleb's footsteps in the hall. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in his work clothes, dust on his boots. His eyes found her immediately. "She's asleep," Eliza reported before he could ask. He nodded, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "Thank you." "Mr. Rowan, I need to ask you something." Eliza stood, squaring her shoulders. "Your daughter is grieving. I can see it as clearly as I can see my own grief in the mirror. And while I respect your boundaries, I can't be cold to her. I won't be. If that's a problem, tell me now, and I'll move on in the morning." He was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the lamplight. Then he moved further into the kitchen, pulling out a chair and sitting down heavily. He looked tired, not just physically, but bone-deep exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with ranch work. 2 years, he said finally. It's been 2 years since Sarah died. Fever took her in less than a week. One day she was laughing and planning Maggie's birthday party, and the next, he rubbed a hand over his face. I thought time would help. I thought if I just kept things stable, kept the routine, Maggie would adjust. But she's not adjusting. She's just fading, like a flower that doesn't get enough sun. "Children need more than stability," Eliza said gently. "They need warmth, connection, permission to feel their feelings instead of burying them." "Like I'm doing, you mean?" It wasn't really a question. "I don't presume to judge you, Mr. Rowan. Everyone handles grief differently. But you think I'm handling it wrong?" Eliza chose her words carefully. "I think you're protecting your daughter the best way you know how. But sometimes protection can look a lot like isolation." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and for the first time she saw past the walls to the man beneath, a man who was just as lost as his daughter, just as desperate for relief from the weight of grief, but who'd convinced himself that feeling less was the same as hurting less. "I can't lose her too," he said quietly. "If I let myself feel everything, I'm afraid I'll break. And if I break, who takes care of Maggie?" "Maybe," Eliza said, "you don't have to do it all alone." The words hung in the air between them, full of meaning neither of them was quite ready to acknowledge. Caleb stood abruptly, the moment broken. "It's late. You should rest. Tomorrow's a full day." He paused at the door. "Mrs. Moore? You can read to Maggie every night if you want, and if she asks you to tuck her in." He didn't finish the sentence, but his meaning was clear. "Thank you, Mr. Rowan." He nodded once and disappeared into the dark hallway. Eliza heard his footsteps on the stairs, then the quiet closing of a door somewhere above. She sat alone in the kitchen for a little while longer, watching the lamplight flicker across the walls. Outside, the Wyoming night was alive with sounds, crickets chirping, cattle lowing in distant pastures, the wind moving through new grass. It was so different from Ohio, where every sound had been familiar, where Thomas's absence had echoed in every room of their small house. Here, she was starting over. Not because she wanted to forget Thomas. She would never forget him. But because staying in that house, in that town, would have meant drowning in memories until there was nothing left of her but grief. Caleb Rowan understood that, she realized. He'd seen it in her immediately, recognized a kindred spirit trying to outrun pain by keeping moving. But Maggie was just a child who'd lost her mother and was slowly losing her father to his own fear of feeling. And maybe, just maybe, Eliza could help with that. Not by replacing what was lost, that was impossible, but by showing them both that it was safe to feel again. That opening your heart didn't mean betraying the memory of those who were gone. It was a dangerous thing she was considering. Getting attached to this child, to this broken family, meant risking her own heart all over again. It meant the possibility of more loss, more pain. But as Eliza finally turned down the lamp and made her way to her small bedroom, she found she was willing to take that risk. Because the alternative, going through life numb and disconnected, never letting anyone close, wasn't really living at all. It was just existing. And Eliza Moore had already spent too many months merely existing. Tomorrow, she decided, she would begin to live again. And maybe, if she was lucky and brave enough, she could help Caleb and Maggie Rowan do the same. The first full week at the Rowan Ranch passed in a rhythm that was both exhausting and oddly comforting. Eliza rose before dawn each morning, the sky still dark and studded with stars, to light the stove and begin breakfast preparations. By the time the sun crested the eastern hills, painting the grasslands in shades of rose and gold, she had coffee brewing and bacon sizzling in the cast-iron skillet. The ranch hands' meals were portioned and waiting in the warming oven by 6 o'clock sharp, and the kitchen table was set for 3. Caleb appeared each morning at precisely 6:15, his face freshly shaved, his dark hair still damp from washing. He would nod his greeting, never quite meeting her eyes, pour himself coffee, and wait in silence until Maggie came downstairs. The girl always entered tentatively, as if uncertain of her welcome, but her face would light up when she saw Eliza at the stove. "Good morning, Miss Eliza," she'd say, and those 3 words became the brightest part of Eliza's day. "Good morning, sweetheart. Did you sleep well?" It was always the same exchange, comfortable in its predictability, and Caleb never objected. In fact, Eliza noticed that his shoulders would relax slightly when Maggie smiled, as if some tension he'd been carrying eased just a fraction. Breakfast was usually pancakes or eggs with bacon, occasionally biscuits with sausage gravy that made the ranch hands send back their empty containers with what Eliza could only interpret as satisfied groans. Maggie would chatter about her dreams, or the barn cat's new kittens, or the wildflowers blooming near the creek, filling the silence her father maintained. Caleb listened, Eliza noticed, even when he didn't respond. His eyes would track his daughter's animated gestures, and sometimes, just sometimes, the corner of his mouth would twitch upward. After breakfast, Caleb would disappear to manage the ranch, and Maggie would hover near Eliza as she cleaned the kitchen and began preparations for the midday meal. The child was hungry for company in a way that broke Eliza's heart. She would pull a chair up to the work counter and watch with rapt attention as Eliza kneaded bread dough or peeled vegetables, asking endless questions about cooking in Ohio and what it was like to be married. "Did you love your husband very much?" Maggie asked one morning, her chin propped on her hands as she watched Eliza roll out pie crust. Eliza paused, the rolling pin heavy in her hands. "Yes, I did. Very much. Papa loved Mama like that. I could tell because he used to look at her the way the sun looks at the flowers, like he was helping her grow." The metaphor was so unexpectedly beautiful that Eliza had to blink back tears. "That's a lovely way to describe it, Maggie. I don't think he looks at anything that way anymore." The girl's voice was matter-of-fact, but there was an undertone of sadness that no 6-year-old should have to carry. "Do you think he'll ever be happy again?" Eliza set down the rolling pin and moved to sit beside Maggie, flour dusting her apron. "I think happiness doesn't leave us forever, even when we lose someone. It just takes a vacation. And slowly, bit by bit, it comes back. Not the same way it was before, but in new ways." "Has your happiness come back?" "Some of it," Eliza admitted. "Being here helps. Having work to do. And meeting you helps very much." Maggie's smile was like sunrise. "Really?" "Really and truly." The girl threw her arms around Eliza's neck with the wholehearted enthusiasm of childhood, and Eliza held her close, breathing in the scent of sunshine and innocence. When they separated, Maggie's eyes were bright with something that looked like hope. "Will you teach me to make pie?" "I would love to teach you to make pie." They spent the rest of the morning covered in flour, Maggie's small hands clumsily mimicking Eliza's practiced movements. The crust was uneven and the filling leaked slightly, but when it came out of the oven that afternoon, golden and fragrant, Maggie's pride was palpable. "Papa has to try it first," she insisted. "Can we save him the biggest piece?" "Of course we can." That evening, when Caleb came in for dinner and saw the slightly lopsided pie cooling on the counter, he raised an eyebrow. "Did we have a flour explosion?" Maggie giggled. Actually giggled, a sound Eliza suspected hadn't been heard in this house for far too long. "Miss Eliza taught me to make pie. You have to try it, Papa. I made it almost all by myself." Something shifted in Caleb's expression, so subtle Eliza almost missed it. His eyes moved from the pie to his daughter's flour-dusted face to Eliza, still wearing her apron and probably looking just as messy as Maggie. When he spoke, his voice was gentler than she'd heard it before. "Then I'm sure it's the best pie I'll ever taste." At dinner, he took a large bite and made a show of savoring it, his eyes closing as if in ecstasy. Delicious. Absolutely perfect. "Really?" Maggie was practically bouncing in her chair. "Would I lie to you?" He reached over and tugged gently on one of her braids, and for just a moment Eliza caught a glimpse of the man he must have been before grief hardened him. Warm, playful, present. The moment passed quickly, his walls sliding back into place. But it had happened, and Eliza filed it away as evidence that Caleb Rowan wasn't as unreachable as he pretended to be. The days lengthened as May gave way to June, and the ranch came alive with activity. Calves were branded, fences were mended, and the garden plot behind the kitchen began to sprout with the vegetables Eliza had planted in the early morning hours. She found she loved the physical work, the ache in her muscles at day's end, the dirt under her fingernails, the tangible evidence of growth and life. Maggie became her constant shadow, helping to water the seedlings and pull weeds, narrating elaborate stories about the adventures of garden vegetables. The tomato plants were a family of explorers. The bean vines were climbing to reach a castle in the clouds. The carrots were secret agents tunneling to China. "You have quite an imagination," Eliza said, smiling as Maggie explained that the squash were actually sleeping dragons. "Mama used to tell me stories. She said imagination makes everything more interesting." "Your mama was very wise." "Do you think she can see me? From heaven?" Eliza sat back on her heels, considering her answer carefully. "I think that the people who love us never really leave us. They stay in our memories and our hearts, and in that way, they're always with us. Papa says we shouldn't talk about Mama because it makes us sad." "Being sad isn't always bad, Maggie. Sometimes we need to be sad to remember how much we loved someone. And then, after we're done being sad for a while, we can remember all the happy times without it hurting quite so much." The girl thought about this, her young face serious. "I like talking about Mama with you. It doesn't hurt as much as I thought it would. You can talk about her whenever you want to." And Maggie did. Over the following weeks, as they worked in the garden or prepared meals together, stories of Sarah Rowan emerged. How she sang while she cooked. How she wore her hair in a complicated braid that Maggie could never quite replicate. How she made up silly songs about chickens and taught Maggie to dance in the kitchen when it rained. Eliza listened to every story, honoring the memory of a woman she'd never met but was coming to respect deeply. Sarah Rowan had clearly been full of life and love, the kind of mother every child deserved. No wonder her loss had hollowed out this family. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the house began to change. Maggie laughed more often. She brought wildflowers inside and arranged them in mason jars, scattering color throughout the previously stark rooms. She sang the silly songs her mother had taught her, her voice echoing through the hallways, and Caleb, though he remained largely silent, seemed to soften around the edges. He began arriving for dinner a few minutes early, watching from the doorway as Maggie helped Eliza set the table. He asked about the garden's progress. He brought Eliza a wooden crate one evening, saying he'd noticed she was running out of storage space in the pantry and had built this in his workshop. "Thank you, Mr. Rowan," Eliza said, genuinely touched by the gesture. "This is very thoughtful." He shrugged, uncomfortable with the gratitude. "Just practical. Can't have a cook without proper storage." But his eyes betrayed him. There was something softer there, something that looked almost like pleasure at being able to help. The ranch hands, who initially kept their distance, began finding excuses to linger near the kitchen. Eliza would find them checking the woodpile or inspecting the garden fence at times that coincidentally aligned with when she was taking fresh bread or pies out of the oven. She started leaving extra portions out, and the men would nod their thanks, gruff but appreciative. "Ma'am, that's the best fried chicken I've had since my mother passed," one of them said one evening, hat in hand, looking embarrassed by his own boldness. I'm glad you enjoyed it. We all do. The boss has been easier lately. Think it's 'cause the food's better, and 'cause little Maggie's smiling again. After he left, Eliza stood in the kitchen, that comment settling over her like a warm blanket. She was making a difference here, not just feeding people, but helping to heal something that had been broken. It was both exhilarating and terrifying. One warm afternoon in mid-June, Eliza was in the garden harvesting the first radishes when she heard hoofbeats approaching. She looked up to see a wagon pulling into the yard, driven by a woman in her 50s with iron-gray hair and a no-nonsense expression. Beside her sat a younger woman, perhaps Eliza's age, dressed in a fine traveling suit. "You must be the new cook," the older woman called out, climbing down from the wagon with surprising agility. "I'm Ruth Campbell. My husband owns the ranch to the south. This is my daughter, Victoria." Eliza wiped her hands on her apron and stood, suddenly conscious of how she must look, dirt-stained and wind-blown. "Eliza Moore. Pleased to meet you. We heard Caleb had finally hired someone. Thought we'd come introduce ourselves." Ruth's eyes were sharp and assessing, taking in every detail. "How long have you been here?" "About 5 weeks now." "And how are you finding it? Caleb's not the easiest man to work for, I imagine." There was something in the woman's tone that put Eliza on guard. "He's been perfectly professional." Victoria stepped forward, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "And little Maggie, how is she adjusting to having another woman in the house?" "She seems to be doing well." "Poor thing, losing her mother so young." Victoria's voice dripped with sympathy that felt performative. "Of course, she needs a woman's influence, someone to guide her into proper young ladyhood. I've told Caleb repeatedly that I'd be happy to help in that regard." Ruth shot her daughter a look that clearly meant be subtle, but Victoria either didn't notice or didn't care. "We should have tea," Ruth said. "Get to know each other properly. After all, we're the closest neighbors, only 12 miles apart." Eliza couldn't refuse without being rude, so she led them into the kitchen and put the kettle on. As she prepared tea and arranged some cookies on a plate, she was acutely aware of Victoria's eyes following her every movement. "This kitchen is quite well organized," Victoria observed. "Much better than when poor Sarah was alive. She was a dear woman, but not the most practical housekeeper." Eliza bit back her first response. "I wouldn't know. I never met her." "Oh, of course not. Well, I knew her quite well. Caleb and I have known each other since childhood, you see. Our families hoped we might—" She trailed off delicately. "But then he met Sarah and well, love makes fools of us all, doesn't it?" The subtext was clear. Victoria had wanted Caleb for herself, and now, with Sarah gone, she was positioning herself to finally claim him. "How nice that you remained friends," Eliza said neutrally, pouring tea. "More than friends, really. Almost family." Victoria accepted her cup with a gracious smile. "Which is why I feel it's my duty to ensure Maggie is being properly cared for. Children can be so easily influenced, especially by—" She paused delicately. "Temporary employees." The emphasis on temporary was deliberate, a reminder that Eliza was hired help, not family, no matter how close she might become to Maggie. Ruth cleared her throat. "What Victoria means is that we're here to support Caleb however we can. It's been a difficult 2 years for him." "I'm sure it has been." "He needs a proper wife," Victoria continued, abandoning all pretense of subtlety. "Someone who understands his position in the community, who can manage his household and help raise Maggie with the right values. Someone of appropriate standing. I'm sure Mr. Rowan is capable of making his own decisions about his future," Eliza said carefully. "Of course he is, but men often need gentle guidance in such matters." Victoria's smile was as sharp as a knife. "I just wanted to make clear for your sake that any inappropriate attachments would be unwise for everyone involved." Eliza set down her teacup with enough force to make it rattle. "Mrs. Campbell." "Miss Campbell," Victoria corrected smoothly. "Miss Campbell, I am Mr. Rowan's cook, nothing more, nothing less. Any assumptions you're making are entirely your own." "I'm sure they are." Victoria's tone suggested she believed no such thing. But a word of advice from one woman to another: don't mistake a grieving man's momentary kindness for something deeper. You'll only end up hurt. Before Eliza could respond, the kitchen door swung open and Maggie burst in, her face flushed with excitement. "Miss Eliza, you should see the kittens! They're—" She stopped short, seeing the visitors. "Oh, hello, Miss Victoria." The coolness in the child's voice was unmistakable. "Maggie, darling." Victoria stood, arms outstretched. "Come give me a hug." Maggie took a deliberate step closer to Eliza instead. "We're very busy right now. Miss Eliza is teaching me about gardening." "How lovely, but surely you can spare a moment for old friends." Victoria's smile remained fixed, but her eyes had gone hard. "Your father and I were just discussing the other day how you need more structured education. Perhaps music lessons? Embroidery?" "I like gardening and cooking better." "Yes, well, those are fine skills for certain types of women." Victoria's gaze flicked meaningfully to Eliza. "But a young lady of your position needs to learn more refined accomplishments." Mama said the best accomplishment was being kind to people. The room went very still. Victoria's smile finally slipped, replaced by something colder. "Your mother was a saint, of course, but she's gone now, and someone needs to guide you properly." "Miss Eliza guides me just fine." Ruth stood abruptly. "We should go. Thank you for the tea, Mrs. Moore." "Yes," Victoria added, her tone clipped. "We wouldn't want to overstay our welcome. Please tell Caleb I stopped by, and that I'll be at the church social on Sunday. I hope he'll save me a dance." After they left, Maggie sagged against Eliza's side. "I don't like her." "Maggie, Mama didn't like her either. I heard her tell Papa once that Miss Victoria was like a pretty dress with scratchy lining, nice to look at but uncomfortable to wear." Eliza couldn't help but laugh, though she tried to cover it with a cough. "That's not a kind thing to say, even if, well, we should always try to see the best in people." "Even when they're mean to you?" "Especially then. Being kind doesn't mean letting people hurt you, but it does mean not stooping to their level." Maggie considered this. "You're much nicer than Miss Victoria, and prettier too." "Beauty is subjective, sweetheart." "What does subjective mean?" "It means different people like different things. What one person thinks is beautiful, another person might not." "Well, I think you're the most beautiful person I've ever seen. Except for Mama. You're different beautiful, but the same amount." She hugged Eliza tightly. "Don't let Miss Victoria make you leave, okay? Promise?" Eliza held the child close, breathing in the scent of sunshine and innocence, and felt her heart crack a little wider. "I promise I won't leave unless I absolutely have to." It was a careful promise, one that left room for circumstances beyond her control, but Maggie accepted it with the faith of childhood. As they returned to the garden, Eliza couldn't shake Victoria's words. Don't mistake a grieving man's momentary kindness for something deeper. But what if it wasn't mistake? What if the connection growing between them, tentative and unacknowledged as it was real? And more importantly, what was she supposed to do about it? That evening, Caleb arrived for dinner with a dark expression and mud splattered across his shirt. "We've got a problem with the water supply. One of the main irrigation channels collapsed. I'll be working late all week to fix it." "I'll keep your dinner warm," Eliza said. "Don't bother. I'll eat cold." He paused, noticing Maggie's subdued mood. "What's wrong, little one?" "Miss Victoria came by today." Caleb's jaw tightened. "What did she want?" "She wanted to remind everyone that she exists," Maggie said with surprising asperity. "And she was mean to Miss Eliza." His eyes snapped to Eliza. "Mean how?" "It wasn't," Eliza began. "She said Miss Eliza was just temporary and shouldn't get inappropriate attachments." Maggie's voice was indignant. "And she said I needed refined accomplishments, whatever those are." Caleb closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them, they were stormy. "I'll speak with her." "That's not necessary," Eliza started. "It is necessary. Victoria has been persistent since Sarah died. I've tried to be diplomatic about it, but clearly I haven't been clear enough." He looked at Eliza directly for the first time in days. "You're not temporary, Mrs. Moore. Not unless you choose to be. And Maggie doesn't need refined accomplishments. She needs to be a child." The words hung in the air, weighted with more meaning than their surface suggested. Not unless you choose to be. It was the closest he'd come to admitting that he valued her presence beyond her cooking skills. "Thank you, Mr. Rowan," Eliza said quietly. He nodded once, then turned to his daughter. And you, Miss Maggie, did exactly right defending someone you care about. Your mother would be proud. Maggie's face lit up. Really? Really and truly. After dinner, as Eliza cleaned the kitchen, she heard Caleb's voice drifting down from upstairs, the low rumble of him reading to Maggie. It had become a new routine in the past week. Eliza would read the first story, then Caleb would appear for the second, the three of them forming a strange, unspoken partnership in caring for this child. Later, after Maggie was asleep, Caleb came down to the kitchen for coffee. He looked exhausted, his hair mussed from running his hands through it, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle and crisscrossed with small scars. I should apologize, he said without preamble. For Victoria's behavior, she has expectations that I've never encouraged but also never explicitly shut down. That was cowardice on my part. Eliza poured him coffee and pushed the cup across the table. You don't owe me an explanation. Maybe not, but I owe you respect. You've done more for Maggie in 6 weeks than anyone else has managed in 2 years, including me. He stared into his coffee. She laughs again. Did you notice? Real laughter, not the polite kind she was doing before. I noticed. I'd forgotten what it sounded like. His voice was rough. I'd forgotten what a lot of things sounded like, what they felt like. After Sarah died, it was like all the color drained out of the world. Everything was gray and flat and distant. I went through the motions because Maggie needed me to, but I wasn't really present. Eliza sat down across from him, her hands wrapped around her own cup. I know that feeling. I know you do. That's why I hired you. I saw it in your letter, that same emptiness. I thought someone who understood grief wouldn't expect me to be anything other than what I was. And now? He finally looked up, meeting her eyes. Now I'm starting to wonder if staying empty is the same thing as staying safe. The honesty in his voice struck her like a physical blow. Here was a man who'd armored himself in silence and distance, admitting that maybe, just maybe, he was tired of being alone. I can't promise I have all the answers, Eliza said carefully. I'm still figuring out how to keep breathing most days. But you're trying. That's more than I've been doing. You've been protecting your daughter. That takes tremendous strength. Or tremendous fear. He smiled, but there was no humor in it. I've been so afraid of Maggie getting attached to someone else who might leave that I've been leaving her myself, just emotionally checking out. How messed up is that? Human, Eliza said. It's human. We all do the best we can with the tools we have. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the kitchen warm and quiet around them. Outside, crickets sang their evening chorus, and somewhere in the distance a coyote howled. It was a lonely sound, and Eliza found herself thinking about all the lonely people in the world, each one trying to protect themselves from more pain by closing off their hearts. Victoria's not wrong about one thing, Caleb said eventually. You could do better than this place, than us. What makes you think I want better? Because you're young, you're talented, and you deserve more than cooking for a broken family on a remote ranch. Eliza set down her cup and leaned forward. Mr. Rowan, Caleb, you're not broken. Grieving, yes. Hurting, definitely, but not broken. And neither is Maggie. You're both just healing at your own pace. He studied her face as if trying to memorize it. Why did you really come here, Eliza? The use of her first name sent a small thrill through her. Because I needed somewhere to heal too, and because... She hesitated, then decided on honesty. Because I was drowning in Ohio. Every street corner reminded me of Thomas. Every pitying look from the neighbors made it harder to breathe. I needed distance to remember who I was before I was a wife, before I was a widow. And have you remembered? I'm starting to. Caleb reached across the table, his hand hovering near hers but not quite touching. Thank you for giving Maggie her laugh back. I didn't realize how much I missed it until I heard it again. She's an easy child to love. So you do love her. It wasn't really a question, and Eliza didn't pretend otherwise. Yes, I do. I know that complicates things, but I can't help it. She reminds me of all the good things in the world that I thought I'd lost. His hand finally closed over hers, warm and calloused and solid. I'm glad. She needs someone to love her without reservation. I've been so busy protecting her that I forgot to just love her loudly. It's not too late. No, he agreed, his thumb brushing across her knuckles in a gesture so gentle it made her throat tight. It's not too late. They stayed like that for a long moment, connected by touch and understanding, before Caleb pulled away, standing abruptly. I should let you get some rest. Tomorrow's another long day. For both of us. He paused at the door, looking back. Eliza, I meant what I said. You're not temporary. Not unless you want to be. After he left, Eliza sat in the dark kitchen, her hand still warm where his had been, her heart beating too fast in her chest. This was dangerous territory. Getting attached to Maggie was one thing. Children were easy to love. But Caleb? That was something else entirely. He was her employer. He was grieving. He was a wealthy rancher with a position in the community, and she was a penniless widow with nothing to offer but her cooking skills and her company. But more than that, loving him meant risking her heart again. It meant opening herself up to the possibility of more loss, more pain. She'd barely survived losing Thomas. Could she really take that chance again? The answer, she realized, was already forming in her heart whether she wanted it to or not. Because somewhere between the flour-dusted pie lessons and the bedtime stories and the quiet conversations in lamplight, she'd started falling for both of them, the serious, wounded man and his bright, brave daughter. And there wasn't a thing she could do to stop it. The weeks that followed brought a shift so subtle that Eliza couldn't pinpoint exactly when things changed, only that they had. Caleb started lingering in the kitchen after breakfast, nursing his coffee and watching as she and Maggie worked together. He'd offer observations about the weather or mention which sections of fence needed mending, his voice less guarded than before. Sometimes he'd even smile at Maggie's chatter, a real smile that reached his eyes and made him look years younger. The ranch hands noticed too. Eliza overheard them talking one afternoon as she hung laundry on the line behind the kitchen, their voices carrying from the barn. Boss seems different lately, less like a thundercloud waiting to break. It's the woman. She's good for him. Good for the little girl, too. Think he's sweet on her? Man would have to be blind not to be. Question is whether he'll do anything about it. Eliza's hands stilled on the sheet she was pinning, her cheeks burning. She knew she should move, make her presence known, but she found herself frozen, wanting to hear more even as shame heated her face. He won't. Too wrapped up in his grief still. Besides, Victoria Campbell's been circling like a hawk. Her mama's already planning the wedding, I'd wager. Victoria Campbell's got ice water in her veins. That cook's got fire. My money's on the fire. Their laughter faded as they moved deeper into the barn, and Eliza forced herself to continue hanging laundry with shaking hands. Fire. Was that how others saw her? She'd spent so long feeling frozen, numb, empty, that the idea of being fire seemed almost laughable. But maybe they were right. Maybe coming to Wyoming, starting over, choosing to feel again instead of staying safely numb. Maybe that was its own kind of fire. July arrived with scorching heat that turned the grasslands golden and made the air shimmer with mirages. The garden required constant watering, and Eliza found herself rising even earlier to tend it before the sun climbed too high. Maggie would often join her, the two of them working in companionable silence as dawn painted the sky in watercolor shades of pink and orange. One morning, as they knelt between rows of tomato plants heavy with green fruit, Maggie spoke without preamble. Miss Eliza, do you think Papa will ever get married again? Eliza's hand stilled in the dirt. I don't know, sweetheart. That's something only your father can decide. Would you be sad if he did? The question was too perceptive for a 6-year-old, and Eliza chose her words carefully. I would want him to be happy, and you to be happy. That's what matters most. But would you be sad? Maggie persisted, her brown eyes searching Eliza's face. I suppose it would depend on who he married. If she was kind to you and made him smile, then I'd be happy for you both. What if it was Miss Victoria? Eliza couldn't help the small shudder that ran through her. Does your father seem interested in Miss Victoria? No, but she keeps coming around. She was here again yesterday while you were at the general store. She brought a cake that Papa fed to the chickens after she left. Despite herself, Eliza laughed. He didn't. He did. He said it tasted like sweetened sawdust and the chickens deserved better, Maggie giggled. Then he said not to tell anyone because it wouldn't be gentlemanly. Well, your secret's safe with me. Maggie was quiet for a moment, pulling weeds with unnecessary force. I don't want him to marry Miss Victoria. I want him to marry you. The words hung in the morning air, impossible to take back, and Eliza felt her heart stumble in her chest. Maggie, I know I'm not supposed to say it, but it's true. You make everything better. The house feels like a home again. Papa smiles sometimes. I'm not scared all the time anymore. Scared of what? The girl's voice dropped to barely a whisper. That he'll disappear too. Like Mama did. That one day, I'll wake up and he'll be gone and I'll be all alone. Eliza pulled Maggie into her arms, holding her tight as the child's small body shook with suppressed sobs. Oh, sweetheart, your papa isn't going anywhere. He loves you so much. But what if something happens? What if he gets sick like Mama? What if there's an accident? The words tumbled out in a rush, all the fears Maggie had been holding inside finally breaking free. At least if he married you, I'd still have someone. You wouldn't leave me, would you? I'm not going anywhere, Eliza promised, rocking her gently. Not unless you want me to. But Maggie, you need to talk to your papa about these fears. He needs to know how scared you've been. I can't. It would make him sad. He's already sad, honey. And knowing that you're scared would help him understand what you need from him. They stayed that way until Maggie's tears subsided, the sun climbing higher and chasing away the coolness of dawn. When they finally returned to the house, Maggie's eyes were red, but her shoulders seemed lighter, as if sharing her fears had eased their weight. That afternoon, while Eliza was preparing chicken for dinner, Caleb appeared in the kitchen doorway looking troubled. Can we talk? Of course. She wiped her hands on her apron and gestured to the table. Coffee? Please. She poured 2 cups and sat across from him, noting the tension in his jaw, the way his hands gripped the coffee cup too tightly. What's wrong? Maggie came to find me in the barn earlier. She was crying. His voice was rough. She told me she's been afraid I'm going to die, that she'd be left alone. How did I not know? How did I not see that she was carrying that around? Eliza reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. Because you've been carrying your own grief, and because children are good at hiding what they think will upset the adults they love. She said she talked to you this morning, that you told her she should tell me. He turned his hand over, lacing his fingers through hers. Thank you for seeing what I couldn't, for helping her find the courage to speak. She's a brave girl. She just needed permission to be scared. She also said, he paused, his thumb tracing circles on her palm in a gesture that made her breath catch. She said she wishes I would marry you. The kitchen suddenly felt too warm, too small. Eliza's heart hammered against her ribs. Caleb, she's 6. She doesn't understand. Doesn't she? His gray eyes held hers, intense and searching. Children often see things more clearly than adults. They haven't learned yet to complicate simple truths. And what truth is that? That you've become essential to us. That this house only feels like a home when you're in it. That I wake up in the morning and the first thing I think about is whether you'll be wearing your blue dress or your gray one. That I find excuses to come inside just to hear your voice. He squeezed her hand gently. Eliza, I'm falling in love with you. I think I have been since the day you stood in my kitchen and told me you understood loss. The words should have terrified her. They should have sent her running, protecting her still healing heart from the risk of more pain, but instead she felt something inside her chest crack open, letting in light. I'm scared, she admitted. I lost Thomas and it nearly destroyed me. The thought of loving someone again, of risking that kind of loss. I know. I'm scared too. Terrified, actually. His smile was crooked, vulnerable. But I'm more scared of spending the rest of my life half alive, going through the motions but never really feeling anything. You've reminded me what it's like to actually live, and I don't want to go back to just existing. This is complicated. I work for you. People will talk. Let them talk. I don't care about Victoria Campbell's opinion or anyone else's. I care about you, about Maggie, about building a life that has joy in it again. He stood, pulling her to her feet, his hands framing her face with a gentleness that made her eyes sting. I'm not asking you to decide anything right now. I just needed you to know, to understand that what's growing between us, it's real, at least for me. For me too, she whispered, and saying it out loud made it true in a way it hadn't been before. I love Maggie, and I'm falling in love with you. But Caleb, what if... He silenced her with a kiss, soft and sweet and tasting of coffee and promise. It was nothing like the passionate kisses she'd shared with Thomas in their youth. This was gentler, more tentative, two broken people finding their way carefully toward each other. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against hers. We don't have to have all the answers today. We'll figure it out together, one day at a time. The sound of the front door slamming made them spring apart. Maggie's voice called out, Miss Eliza, I'm hungry. Can we have those cookies you made? Caleb laughed, the sound rusty but genuine. Duty calls. Apparently, Eliza touched her fingers to her lips, still feeling the ghost of his kiss. Caleb, one day at a time sounds perfect. The following weeks passed in a haze of heightened awareness. Every accidental brush of hands felt electric. Every shared glance across the dinner table held weight. Caleb found reasons to help in the kitchen, their shoulders bumping as they worked side by side. Eliza caught herself watching him through the window as he worked with the horses, admiring the strength in his movements, the patience in his voice. They were careful around Maggie, not wanting to confuse her or make promises they weren't ready to keep. But the child seemed to sense the shift anyway, her smiles growing wider, her laughter coming more freely. Papa whistled today, she announced one evening at dinner. A whole song. He hasn't done that since Mama was alive. Caleb's ears turned red. I was in a good mood. Because of Miss Eliza, Maggie said with the blunt confidence of childhood. Everything's better because of Miss Eliza. Everything's better because we're all learning to be happy again, Eliza corrected gently. All three of us together. It was a perfect moment, the three of them gathered around the table, easy and comfortable in each other's presence. Eliza let herself imagine a future of such moments, stretching out into years. Maggie growing up with laughter in her life. Caleb smiling more often than he frowned. Herself, finally home after months of wandering. She should have known better than to trust in perfect moments. They never lasted. The fire started on a Wednesday afternoon in late July, when the heat had climbed past 100 degrees and the air was so dry it seemed to crackle. Caleb and the ranch hands were in the far pastures, mending a fence that the cattle had knocked down. Maggie was supposed to be in her room, resting during the hottest part of the day while Eliza prepared dinner. But children are curious creatures, and barn cats are unpredictable, and fate doesn't care about supposed-to-bes. Eliza was peeling apples for a pie when she heard it, a sharp crack followed by the frightened whinny of horses. She dropped her knife and ran to the window, her heart already knowing what her mind refused to accept. Smoke was pouring from the barn, black and thick, and rising fast. And somewhere in that smoke, she could hear a child screaming. Maggie! She didn't think. Thinking would have meant acknowledging danger, calculating risks, choosing safety over action. Instead, she simply ran, her legs pumping as fast as they would go, her lungs already burning from the smoke that seemed to be everywhere now. The barn doors were open, and she could see orange flames licking up the far wall where hay was stored. The horses were panicking in their stalls, and there, crouched in the corner near the tack room, was Maggie, frozen with terror as a beam above her head began to smolder. Maggie, come to me, Eliza screamed over the roar of the flames. I can't. My foot's stuck. Eliza plunged into the smoke, her eyes streaming, her throat closing. She could feel the heat of the fire on her skin, could hear the ominous groan of wood about to give way. She reached Maggie and saw that the child's foot was wedged beneath a fallen saddle rack. Hold on to me, Eliza commanded, lifting the rack with strength she didn't know she had. Maggie's foot came free, and Eliza scooped her up, turning back toward the door just as the burning beam above them gave way with a shriek of tortured wood. The impact drove Eliza to her knees, her back erupting in searing pain as the beam struck her shoulders. She kept her body curved over Maggie, protecting the child even as her vision began to gray at the edges. The smoke was too thick, too hot, stealing the air from her lungs. She tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't obey. The world tilted sideways, and she could hear Maggie crying. could feel small hands tugging at her dress, but everything was getting darker, farther away. Then there were other hands, stronger ones, lifting the beam off her back. Caleb's voice, hoarse with panic. "I've got you. Both of you. Hold on." He carried them both out. Eliza barely conscious, Maggie sobbing hysterically, emerging from the barn just as the roof began to collapse inward. The ranch hands were already there with buckets, fighting to keep the flames from spreading to the other buildings. Caleb laid them on the grass, his hands shaking as he checked them over. Maggie had some minor burns and would smell like smoke for days, but she was alive, relatively unharmed. Eliza was less fortunate. The beam had torn through her dress and the flesh beneath, and blood was seeping through the fabric at an alarming rate. "Someone ride for the doctor," Caleb shouted, his face ashen. "Now!" "Papa, is Miss Eliza going to die?" Maggie's voice was small and terrified. "Like Mama?" "No." The word was fierce, definitive. "No, she's not going to die. I won't let her." But even as he said it, Eliza could see the fear in his eyes, the same helpless terror he must have felt watching Sarah slip away. History repeating itself, loss compounding loss. "Caleb?" she managed to whisper, her voice raw from smoke. "Maggie? She's safe. Because of you. You saved her." His hands were pressing something against her back, trying to staunch the bleeding, and his face was too close to hers, his eyes too bright. "Why did you run in there? You could have died." "Had to. She's—" Eliza's voice faded, consciousness slipping. "Love her. Love you both. Don't you dare." His voice cracked. "Don't you dare say goodbye to me. You're going to be fine. The doctor's coming. You're going to be fine." But the darkness was pulling at her, insistent and heavy. The last thing she heard before it claimed her was Caleb's voice breaking on her name and Maggie's sobs, and the distant crackling of fire consuming the barn that had nearly consumed them all. When consciousness returned, it came in fragments, pain lancing through her back, the smell of antiseptic and smoke, voices speaking in low, urgent tones. She tried to move and immediately regretted it as agony shot through every nerve. "Easy." Caleb's face swam into focus above her, haggard and unshaven. "Don't move. The doctor said you need to stay still." "How long?" Her voice was barely a rasp. 2 days. You've been in and out." His hand found hers, gripping it like a lifeline. "The burns are bad, Eliza, and there's some damage to your shoulder where the beam hit. Doc says you'll heal, but it's going to take time." "Maggie?" "She's fine. A little smoke inhalation, some minor burns on her hands. She's been in here every waking moment, refusing to leave your side." He smiled, but it was strained. "I finally got her to go eat something. She'll be back any minute." Eliza looked around and realized she was in her small bedroom off the kitchen. Someone had made it as comfortable as possible. Extra pillows, fresh linens, a pitcher of water on the nightstand. Through the doorway, she could see into the kitchen, where late afternoon sunlight slanted across the floor. "The barn?" "Gone. We managed to save the other buildings, but the barn's a total loss." He rubbed his free hand over his face. "I don't care about the barn. I almost lost both of you. When I saw that smoke, when I heard Maggie screaming—" He couldn't finish, his voice breaking. "I'm sorry. I didn't think. You saved my daughter's life." The intensity in his voice made her breath catch. "You ran into a burning building without hesitation because Maggie needed you. Do you understand what that means to me? What you mean to me?" "Caleb, I thought I'd lost you. I thought I was going to have to watch someone else I loved die. And I realized that I can't do this halfway anymore. I can't pretend what I feel for you is anything less than everything." He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "When you're healed, when you're strong again, I'm going to ask you properly. But I need you to know now, I love you, Eliza Moore, completely, entirely, with every part of me that knows how to love." Tears slipped down her temples into her hair. "I love you too, so much it terrifies me." "Good. Because I'm terrified too. But I'm done letting fear make my decisions." He leaned down, kissing her forehead with exquisite gentleness. "We'll figure out the rest. Together." The door burst open and Maggie flew in. her face lighting up when she saw Eliza's eyes open. "You're awake! Papa said you might sleep all day again, but you're awake." "Come here, sweetheart." Eliza's voice was weak but warm. Maggie climbed carefully onto the bed, mindful of Eliza's injuries. "I was so scared. I thought you were going to die like Mama, and it would be my fault because I shouldn't have gone in the barn, but there was a kitten, and shh. It's okay. It wasn't your fault. Accidents happen." Eliza brushed the hair back from Maggie's face. "Are you hurt?" "My hands got a little burned, but Doc wrapped them up and they barely hurt anymore. Not like your back." The child's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry you got hurt saving me." "I'm not sorry, not for 1 second. You're worth 100 burned barns and 1,000 injured backs." Eliza pulled her closer, ignoring the pain it caused. "I would do it again in a heartbeat." Maggie buried her face in Eliza's shoulder, crying softly. Caleb moved to sit on the other side of the bed, his hand resting on Maggie's back, and for a moment they were a tableau of relief and love and hard-won hope. "Miss Eliza?" Maggie's voice was muffled. "Are you going to stay forever now?" Eliza met Caleb's eyes over his daughter's head, seeing the question there, the vulnerability, the desperate hope that mirrored her own. "Yes, sweetheart. If your papa wants me to, I'm going to stay forever." "I want you to," Caleb said immediately, "more than anything." "Then it's settled." Maggie sat up, wiping her eyes, and for the first time since the fire, she smiled. "We're going to be a real family." The days that followed were difficult ones. Eliza's injuries kept her bedridden, dependent on others for the first time in her life. Caleb hired a temporary cook from town, but the woman was brisk and efficient where Eliza had been warm, and Maggie spent more time sulking in Eliza's room than anywhere else. "I don't like Mrs. Henderson," she announced one afternoon. "She made soup that tasted like dishwater." "Be kind," Eliza chided gently. "She's doing her best." "Her best isn't as good as your best." Caleb, who'd been reading in the corner, looked up with a smile. "No arguing with that logic." As Eliza healed, slowly, painfully, the three of them fell into a new rhythm. Caleb would carry her to a chair on the porch in the morning so she could feel the sun on her face and watch the ranch come alive. Maggie would sit at her feet, reading aloud or chattering about the new kittens or the progress on the barn reconstruction. In the evenings, Caleb would read to them both, his deep voice a comfort in the gathering dark. It was during one of these evenings, with the lamp casting warm shadows and Maggie dozing against Eliza's side, that Caleb set down his book and reached into his pocket. "I know this isn't the most romantic setting," he began, his voice nervous in a way she'd never heard before. "And I know you're still healing, but I've waited long enough, and I don't want to wait anymore." He opened a small box, revealing a simple gold band with a single small diamond. "This was my grandmother's. It's not fancy, but it's been in my family for 3 generations. Sarah never wanted to wear it. She preferred something more modern, so it's been in my drawer all these years." He took Eliza's hand carefully, mindful of her still healing injuries. "Eliza Moore, will you marry me? Will you be my wife, Maggie's mother, and my partner in building a life that has joy in it again?" Maggie sat bolt upright, suddenly wide awake. "Are you asking? Are you really asking?" "I'm really asking." Caleb's eyes never left Eliza's face. "What do you say?" What could she say? This man and his daughter had become her whole world, had reminded her that life after loss was possible, that love was worth the risk. Thomas would want her to be happy, she realized. He would want her to embrace this second chance, instead of clinging to grief out of some misguided sense of loyalty. "Yes," she said, her voice clear despite her tears. "Yes, I'll marry you." Maggie shrieked with joy, bouncing on the bed hard enough to make Eliza wince. Caleb slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, and kissed her with a tenderness that promised forever. "We're a family now," Maggie declared. "A real, actual family." "We were already a family," Caleb corrected gently. "This just makes it official." And as Eliza sat there, ring on her finger and her future suddenly bright with possibility, she realized he was right. They'd been a family since that first morning when Maggie had asked for a story, since Caleb had let his walls crack enough to let her see the man beneath. The fire hadn't created their bond. It had simply revealed how unbreakable that bond already was. She'd come to Wyoming empty and alone, expecting nothing more than a job and a place to hide from her grief. Instead, she'd found a home, a purpose, and a love she'd thought she'd never experience again. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Her injuries would take months to fully heal. There would be gossip to face, Victoria Campbell's inevitable fury, the challenges of blending their lives completely. But none of that mattered, not really, because they would face it together. 3 broken people had found each other beneath the wide Wyoming sky, and in finding each other, they'd begun to heal. The house that had been silent and empty now rang with laughter and life. The man who'd forgotten how to feel was learning to love again. The child who'd been afraid of losing everyone had gained a family that would never let her go. And the widow who'd thought her capacity for joy had died with her husband discovered that the heart had an infinite capacity to love, if only you were brave enough to open it. As night fell and Maggie finally drifted off to sleep, Caleb carried her to her own bed before returning to sit beside Eliza. They didn't speak, didn't need to. The silence between them was comfortable, full of promise and understanding, and the quiet certainty that they'd found something rare and precious. Tomorrow, the work of building their future would begin. But tonight, in this moment, everything was perfect exactly as it was. The morning light found them still sitting together, Caleb dozing in the chair beside her bed, while Eliza watched the dawn paint the kitchen walls in shades of amber and rose. Her back ached with a persistent throb that no amount of laudanum could fully erase, but the ring on her finger caught the early light and made everything else seem bearable. She twisted it gently, still marveling that it was real, that this wasn't some fever dream conjured by pain and longing. Caleb stirred, his eyes opening slowly before focusing on her face. "You should be sleeping." "I was too happy to sleep." She smiled at him, noting the lines of exhaustion around his eyes. "You should go rest properly. You can't keep spending nights in that chair." "I'm not leaving you alone." "I'm not alone. Mrs. Henderson is sleeping in the spare room upstairs, and Maggie will be up soon." She reached for his hand. "Please, Caleb. You're no good to anyone if you collapse from exhaustion." He stood reluctantly, bending to kiss her forehead. "A few hours. That's all. Then I'm coming back. Take as long as you need. I'm not going anywhere." After he left, Eliza lay in the growing light, listening to the sounds of the ranch waking up around her. Roosters crowing, cattle lowing in distant pastures, the murmur of the ranch hands beginning their daily work. It was a symphony she'd grown to love, proof that life continued its rhythms regardless of human drama. Mrs. Henderson appeared shortly after, a stout woman in her 50s with kind eyes and no-nonsense manner. "You're awake early. How's the pain?" "Manageable." That's what people say when it's actually terrible, but they don't want to admit it. She checked Eliza's bandages with practiced efficiency. "The doc will be by this afternoon to change these. Until then, you need to stay still and drink this." She produced a cup of bitter-smelling tea. "What is it?" "Willow bark and herbs. Better than laudanum for long-term healing. It tastes like the devil's bathwater, but it works." Eliza drank it, grimacing at the flavor, and was rewarded with an approving nod. Mrs. Henderson had just finished helping her sit up slightly when Maggie burst into the room, still in her nightgown, her dark hair a wild tangle. "You're still here!" The relief in her voice was palpable. "Where else would I be, sweetheart? I had a bad dream. I dreamed you left and Papa was sad again, and everything went back to being gray and quiet." She climbed onto the bed with practiced care, nestling against Eliza's uninjured side. "But you're really staying, right? You promised." "I promised, and I meant it. See?" Eliza held up her left hand, showing the ring. "This means I'm part of the family now, forever and always." Maggie traced the ring with one small finger, her expression serious. "Miss Victoria isn't going to like it." "Miss Victoria's feelings are her own concern. She's going to be really mean, meaner than before." The child looked up at her with worried brown eyes. "Are you sure you want to marry Papa, even if people are mean?" Eliza gathered her close, ignoring the pull on her injuries. "Maggie, listen to me. I love your father, and I love you. Nothing anyone says or does can change that. People might gossip or disapprove, but their opinions don't matter. What matters is that we're happy together. Do you understand?" "I think so." Maggie was quiet for a moment. "Mama used to say that small people try to make others feel small too. She said the best thing to do was to be so big inside that their smallness couldn't touch you. Your mama was a very wise woman. I'm glad you're not trying to be exactly like her. Papa said you couldn't be, and he was right. But you're different. Good. Not better or worse good. You're Miss Eliza Good, which is its own special thing. The simple wisdom of it brought tears to Eliza's eyes. That might be the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me. Mrs. Henderson, who'd been tidying the room with tactful silence, cleared her throat. I'll make breakfast. Miss Maggie, you should get dressed and help me. Give Mrs. Moore some rest. Can I come back after? Of course you can. After they left, Eliza closed her eyes, letting exhaustion pull her under for a few hours. When she woke again, it was to the sound of raised voices coming from the kitchen. She recognized Caleb's low rumble and another voice, feminine and sharp, Victoria Campbell. You can't possibly be serious. A cook? A common widow who's been here barely 2 months? How I choose to live my life is none of your concern, Victoria. It most certainly is my concern. Our families have been neighbors for 3 generations. Everyone expected that we would. You expected. I never gave you any reason to believe I felt the same way. Because you were grieving. I understood that. I was patient. And now you throw me over for a woman who has nothing, no family, no connections, no standing in the community? Eliza's stomach twisted with a mixture of anger and shame. Everything Victoria said was true. She had nothing to offer Caleb except herself. What right did she have to think that was enough? What she has, Caleb said, his voice dangerously quiet, is kindness, courage, and genuine love for my daughter. She ran into a burning building to save Maggie's life. She makes this house feel like a home again. And I love her. That's all that matters. You're making a mistake. You're letting loneliness and gratitude cloud your judgment. In 6 months, you'll realize what you've done, and by then it will be too late. The only mistake I've made is allowing you to harbor false hope for 2 years. I should have been clearer from the beginning. I'm sorry if I hurt you, Victoria, but my decision is final. I see. Victoria's voice had gone cold. I hope you know what you're bringing on yourself. On all of you. This town won't accept her easily. Not as your wife. People will talk. They'll speculate about whether she used Maggie to trap you, whether this was her plan all along. Then they can talk. I stopped caring about gossip when Sarah died, and half the town couldn't be bothered to check on a grieving widower and his daughter. The front door slammed hard enough to rattle the windows, and Eliza heard Caleb's heavy footsteps crossing the kitchen. He appeared in her doorway, his face flushed with anger and something that looked like shame. You heard. Most of it. He came to sit beside her, taking her hand. I'm sorry you had to hear that. Victoria has no right. She's not entirely wrong, though, is she? Eliza's voice was quiet. I don't have family or connections or standing. I am just a cook who's been here 2 months. People will think I manipulated you. Eliza, Tim. I'm not saying I regret accepting your proposal. I'm saying I understand what we're facing. She squeezed his hand. Your life would be easier if you married someone like Victoria, someone the community would accept without question. My life would be miserable if I married Victoria. He lifted her hand to his lips. I don't care about easy, Eliza. I care about real. And what we have, what we're building, that's real. What if Maggie gets hurt by the gossip? Children can be cruel. Then we'll teach her how to hold her head high and not let small people make her feel small. He smiled slightly. Apparently Sarah used to say something like that. Maggie told me this morning. She told me too. Eliza studied his face, seeing the determination there, but also the worry he was trying to hide. Caleb, be honest with me. Are you sure about this? Really sure? Because once we announce our engagement publicly, there's no taking it back without causing even more talk. He was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. When Sarah died, I thought my life was over. Not literally, obviously. I had Maggie to take care of, but all the parts of me that knew how to feel joy or hope or love, those parts died with her. I convinced myself that was fine, that being numb was safer than feeling. And then you arrived with your worn carpet bag and your careful walls and your grief that matched my own, and everything started changing. He looked at her directly, his gray eyes clear and steady. You didn't push. You didn't try to force happiness on us. You just existed alongside us, letting us be broken while somehow showing us it was okay to start healing. Maggie laughed again because of you. I remembered how to smile because of you. And when I thought I'd lost you in that fire, I realized that being numb wasn't safer. It was just a slower way of dying. Tears streamed down Eliza's face. I feel the same way. You and Maggie gave me a reason to keep breathing when I thought I'd forgotten how. Then we're sure, both of us. Everything else, Victoria's anger, the town's gossip, all of it, we'll handle it together. He leaned forward carefully, kissing her with a tenderness that made her heart ache. I love you, Eliza Moore. Soon to be Eliza Rowan, and I'm not ashamed of that or apologetic about it. I love you too. Maggie appeared in the doorway, having clearly been eavesdropping. Are we still getting married? Miss Victoria didn't ruin it? Nothing could ruin it, Caleb assured her. Though maybe we should have the wedding sooner rather than later, before your Miss Eliza has time to come to her senses and realize she could do better. I'm not going anywhere, Eliza said firmly, though I would like to be able to stand on my own for the ceremony. How long did the doctor say? Another 3 weeks before I can move normally, 6 before the burns are fully healed. Then we'll wait 6 weeks. I want you to have the wedding you deserve, not one where you're in pain through the whole thing. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. 3 days later, as Eliza was finally able to sit up in a chair on the porch for more than an hour at a time, a rider came galloping up to the house in a cloud of dust. He swung down from his horse, his face urgent. Mr. Rowan, there's been an accident at the Campbell Ranch. Their barn roof collapsed. 3 men trapped. They're asking for help. Caleb was already moving, calling for the ranch hands, organizing a rescue party. He paused at Eliza's chair, bending to kiss her forehead. I have to go. Whatever our differences with Victoria, those men need help. Of course, be careful. Always. He looked at Maggie, who'd come running at the commotion. You stay here with Miss Eliza and Mrs. Henderson. Mind what they tell you. He was gone within minutes, along with most of the ranch hands, leaving the property eerily quiet. Mrs. Henderson brought Eliza tea and fresh bandages, muttering about men and their dangerous heroics, but Eliza could see the worry in her eyes, too. The afternoon dragged by with agonizing slowness. Maggie tried to read but couldn't focus, eventually abandoning her book to pace the porch. What if something happens to Papa? What if the roof isn't stable and it collapses more? Your father is very careful and very experienced. He'll be fine. But even as she said it, Eliza felt her own anxiety mounting. They'd just found each other, just committed to a future together. The universe couldn't be cruel enough to tear them apart now, could it? It was nearly dinner time when the sound of horses announced the rescue party's return. Eliza struggled to her feet, ignoring the pull of her injuries, as Caleb dismounted and strode toward the porch. He was covered in dust and what looked like dried blood, but he was whole and walking and alive. Thank goodness, Eliza breathed as he took the porch steps 2 at a time. We got them all out, 2 with broken bones, 1 with a concussion, but they'll all live. He pulled her carefully into his arms. Ruth Campbell was there. She saw how hard we worked to save those men despite everything. When we were leaving, she pulled me aside. What did she say? She apologized, said she'd been pushing Victoria toward me because she thought it was what I needed. But seeing me today, seeing how driven I was to help even after Victoria's behavior, made her realize I was already living the life I wanted. And she said, he paused, something like wonder in his voice. She said Sarah would have approved of you, that Sarah always believed love could find us more than once if we were brave enough to accept it. Eliza felt her knees weaken, and Caleb steadied her, guiding her back to the chair. She really said that? She did. And she said she'd make sure the other ranching families knew that our marriage had her blessing. Ruth Campbell's word carries weight in this county. It won't stop all the gossip, but it'll help. Maggie, who'd been watching wide-eyed, suddenly threw her arms around both of them. See? Everything's working out. It's like Mama's watching over us and making things okay. Caleb met Eliza's eyes over his daughter's head, and she saw her own thoughts reflected there. Maybe Sarah was watching over them. Or maybe they'd just been blessed with the courage to fight for their happiness despite the obstacles. Either way, they were building something good here, something worth protecting. That evening, after Maggie was asleep and Mrs. Henderson had retired to her room, Caleb sat beside Eliza's bed and pulled a small wooden box from his pocket. I found this today while I was looking for rope in the storage shed. I'd forgotten it was there. He opened the box to reveal a delicate silver locket on a thin chain. Inside was a tiny painting, a miniature portrait of a woman with dark hair and kind eyes. Sarah. She wore this every day until she got too sick to care about jewelry anymore. I put it away after she died because I couldn't bear to look at it. His voice was rough. But today, when Ruth said what she said, I thought, maybe it's time. He held the locket out to Eliza. I want you to have this. Not to replace her memory, but to honor it. Sarah loved Maggie more than anything in this world. If she could see how much you love our daughter, how well you care for her, she'd want you to have this. A way of passing the torch, so to speak. Eliza took the locket with trembling hands. Caleb, are you sure? This is so personal. I'm sure. You're not erasing Sarah by loving us. You're continuing what she started, building a family full of love and laughter. That's what she would have wanted. He fastened the chain around Eliza's neck. Besides, I talked to Maggie about it. She thinks it's perfect. She said it means both her mothers are close to her heart now. The tears came then, flowing freely, and Caleb held her while she cried, for Sarah, for Thomas, for all the loss and pain that had brought them to this moment, and for the unexpected joy of finding love again when she'd thought that part of her life was over. I'll honor her memory, Eliza whispered. I'll make sure Maggie never forgets her. I know you will. That's why I love you. The weeks that followed brought a new rhythm to their lives. As Eliza healed, she began taking on more of her old duties, though Caleb and Mrs. Henderson conspired to keep her from overdoing it. She'd find chairs mysteriously placed near work surfaces so she could sit while cooking. Heavy tasks would be completed before she could attempt them. Maggie became her shadow again, helping with everything and chattering constantly about the wedding. Can I have a new dress? A blue one like the sky? Of course you can. And can we have a cake? A really big cake with flowers made of frosting? Whatever kind of cake you want, sweetheart. And will I get to call you Mama, or should I still call you Miss Eliza? Eliza set down the potato she'd been peeling and pulled Maggie into her lap, careful of her still healing back. You can call me whatever feels right to you. If you want to call me Mama, I would be honored. If you want to keep calling me Miss Eliza, that's perfectly fine too. And if you want to call me something completely different, we can figure that out together. Maggie thought about this seriously. I think Mama Eliza. Because you're going to be my mama, but you're also you. Not my first mama, but my second mama. Is that okay? That's more than okay. That's perfect. The child beamed. Papa's going to be so happy. He told me yesterday that getting married to you was like the sun coming back after a long winter. He said you make everything warm again. Did he now? Eliza felt her cheeks heat. He did. He also said, I'm not supposed to tell you that because it's embarrassing, but I think you should know. Maggie grinned impishly. He talks about you a lot when you're not around, about how brave you are and how pretty you look in the morning light and how your laugh sounds like music. Maggie Rowan, are you spying on your father? Not spying, just paying attention. She hopped off Eliza's lap. I'm going to go tell him you're almost done with dinner, and that I told you all the mushy things he said. He'll turn really red, and it'll be funny. She scampered off before Eliza could stop her, leaving her shaking her head and smiling. This child, this beautiful, brave, impossibly perceptive child, had stolen her heart as completely as her father had. That evening, true to Maggie's prediction, Caleb did turn red when his daughter gleefully reported her eavesdropping. You're supposed to keep secrets, not broadcast them. But they're such good secrets. Why would I keep them quiet? Because your papa has a reputation to maintain, he said, trying and failing to look stern. I can't have people thinking I'm soft. You are soft, Maggie informed him. On the inside, where it counts. Mama Eliza says the strongest people are the ones who let themselves be soft with the people they love. Caleb's eyes found Eliza's across the table. Mama Eliza? If that's all right with you, it's more than all right. His voice was thick with emotion. It's perfect. The final 3 weeks before the wedding passed in a blur of preparation and healing. Eliza's back slowly knit itself back together, the burns fading from angry red to pink to pale silver scars that the doctor assured her would continue to fade with time. She was able to stand for longer periods, to move without constant pain, to begin reclaiming her life. The town dressmaker came to the ranch to fit Eliza for a wedding dress. A simple affair in cream-colored silk that wouldn't have been appropriate for a first wedding, but was perfect for a widow remarrying. Maggie got her blue dress, along with new ribbons for her hair and new shoes that she insisted on wearing everywhere, even to bed. Ruth Campbell made good on her word, spreading news of the engagement with such enthusiasm that it became difficult for the other ranching families to object without looking churlish. A few still did, of course. There would always be those who thought Eliza was beneath Caleb's station, but most responded with cautious acceptance and even a few genuine congratulations. Victoria Campbell did not attend or respond to the invitation, and Eliza found she didn't care. Some people would never be happy for others' joy, and that was their burden to carry, not hers. The night before the wedding, Eliza sat in her small room off the kitchen, running her fingers over the wedding dress hanging on the door. Tomorrow she would marry Caleb Rowan. Tomorrow she would officially become Maggie's mother. Tomorrow she would step into a future she'd never imagined when she'd arrived at this ranch 6 months ago, desperate and alone. A soft knock made her turn. Caleb stood in the doorway, looking uncertain. "I know it's bad luck to see each other the night before, but I needed to tell you something. Come in." He closed the door behind him and crossed to where she sat, taking her hands in his. "I've been thinking about what Victoria said, about whether I'm making a mistake, whether this is really love or just gratitude and loneliness." Eliza's heart stuttered. And I know the difference. I love Sarah desperately, completely, with the passion of youth and first love. What I feel for you is different. It's deeper, quieter, built on understanding and shared grief, and the conscious choice to open my heart again, despite knowing how much it can hurt to lose someone. He cupped her face in his hands. "I'm not confusing gratitude with love, Eliza. I'm grateful to you, yes, but I also love you. Those are two separate things that happen to exist at the same time. I love you too. So much it terrifies me sometimes." "Good. Because a love that doesn't scare you a little isn't worth having." He kissed her softly, sweetly, a promise of tomorrow, and all the tomorrows after that. "Get some sleep. I'll see you at the altar." After he left, Eliza lay in the darkness, touching the locket that held Sarah's picture, and whispered into the quiet, "Thank you. For loving them first. For showing them what family means. I promise I'll take care of them. I promise I'll make them happy. And I promise I'll never let Maggie forget you." There was no answer, of course, but somehow Eliza felt at peace. The past and the future could coexist. Love could be both old and new. And hearts that had been broken could heal and love again, not despite their scars, but because of them. Tomorrow, she would become Eliza Rowan. Tomorrow, she would step into the future she'd fought so hard to deserve. But tonight, she was still Eliza Moore, widow and survivor, taking one last moment to honor everything she'd been before embracing everything she was about to become. And she was ready. Morning arrived with the sky so blue it looked painted, the kind of perfect late summer day that made everything feel possible. Eliza woke to the sound of birds singing and Maggie's excited whisper just outside her door. "Is she awake yet? Can I go in?" "Give her a few more minutes, sweetheart," Mrs. Henderson's voice replied. "It's her wedding day. Let her have a moment of peace before the chaos begins." But Eliza was already smiling, already sitting up despite the lingering stiffness in her back. "You can come in, Maggie." The door burst open and Maggie flew in, still in her nightgown, her dark hair wild around her face. "It's today. You're getting married today. Are you nervous?" "Papa's nervous." He knocked over his shaving mug and said a bad word that I'm not supposed to repeat. "I'm not nervous," Eliza said, realizing as she spoke that it was true. She'd been nervous before marrying Thomas, terrified of disappointing him or failing at being a wife. But this felt different, like coming home after a long journey, natural and right, and meant to be. "I'm excited and happy, and maybe a little bit scared, but the good kind of scared. The kind where your stomach feels all fluttery, but in a nice way. Exactly that kind." Maggie climbed onto the bed, bouncing slightly. "I helped Papa pick flowers this morning. We got wildflowers from the meadow, purple and yellow and white ones. He said Mama Sarah always liked wildflowers better than fancy roses because they were honest. What does that mean? Eliza pulled Maggie close, breathing in the sunshine smell of her hair. It means they grow where they want to grow, without anyone telling them to. They're beautiful just by being themselves. Like you and Papa. You didn't try to be fancy or different. You just were yourselves, and that's why you fit together. The wisdom of children never ceased to amaze her. That's exactly right, sweetheart. Mrs. Henderson appeared with breakfast on a tray. Fresh bread, eggs, berries, and coffee, so strong it could wake the dead. Eat! You'll need your strength. The ceremony's at 2 o'clock, and we've got a lot to do before then. The next few hours passed in a flurry of activity. Eliza bathed with Maggie's help, the girl chattering nonstop about who was coming and what food would be served, and whether Eliza thought the new barn would be finished by winter. Mrs. Henderson brushed and pinned Eliza's hair into an elegant twist, weaving in some of the wildflowers Caleb had picked. The cream silk dress slid over her shoulders like water, and when Eliza looked in the small mirror, she barely recognized herself. The woman looking back at her was radiant, her cheeks flushed with color, her eyes bright with joy. The grief that had haunted her for so long was still there. She could see it in the set of her mouth, the shadows behind her smile, but it no longer defined her. She was more than her loss now. She was a woman who'd survived and chosen to live fully again. You look like a princess, Maggie breathed, resplendent in her own blue dress with ribbons threaded through her braids. Papa's going to cry when he sees you. Your papa doesn't cry. He does now. I saw him crying last week when he thought no one was looking. Happy crying, though. The kind that means your heart's so full it has to leak out through your eyes. Eliza knelt carefully in front of Maggie, taking her small hands. Are you happy about this? Really, truly happy? Because if you have any doubts or worries, you can tell me. This is a big change for all of us. Maggie's face grew serious. I loved Mama. I'll always love Mama. But she's gone, and you're here, and you make Papa smile again. You make our house feel like a home instead of just a place where we sleep. And you saved my life even though you could have died. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I think Mama would want Papa to marry you. I think she'd be happy that we're not sad all the time anymore. Come here. Eliza pulled her into a fierce hug, feeling tears prick her eyes. I promise I will always honor your Mama's memory. I promise I'll tell you stories about her when you're older and help you remember all the ways she loved you. And I promise that loving me doesn't mean you're being disloyal to her. Hearts are big enough for all kinds of love. I know, that's what Papa said too. Maggie pulled back, her face wet but smiling. We're going to be okay, aren't we? All three of us together? We're going to be better than okay. We're going to be happy. A knock on the door announced Ruth Campbell's arrival, surprising Eliza. The older woman stood in the doorway holding a wrapped package, her expression softer than Eliza had ever seen it. May I come in? I won't stay long. Of course. Ruth entered, her eyes taking in Eliza's appearance with an approving nod. You look lovely, my dear. Sarah would have approved. She held out the package. I brought you something. A wedding gift, but also an apology for my daughter's behavior and my own part in encouraging her expectations. Eliza unwrapped the package to find a beautiful shawl, delicately embroidered with flowers and birds. Mrs. Campbell, this is too much. It belonged to my mother. She wore it on her wedding day, and I wore it on mine. I'd always planned to give it to Victoria for hers, but she smiled sadly. Victoria won't be getting married anytime soon, I think. And even if she does, I don't believe she'd appreciate its significance the way you might. A woman who runs into burning buildings to save a child understands sacrifice and love in ways my daughter never has. Thank you, Eliza said, genuinely moved. This means more than you know. I also wanted to say that you're welcome at our ranch anytime. I know things have been awkward, but you're going to be part of this community now, and the community takes care of its own. Ruth glanced at Maggie, who was watching wide-eyed. Your mama was a dear friend of mine, Maggie, and I think she'd be very pleased to know that Miss Eliza is joining your family. After Ruth left, Maggie touched the shawl reverently. Everyone's being so nice today, even the people who were mean before. People often surprise you when you give them the chance. The small ceremony was held in the meadow behind the house, where wildflowers grew thick and the view stretched for miles in every direction. Chairs had been arranged in neat rows, and someone had constructed a simple arbor decorated with more wildflowers and trailing vines. It wasn't a grand affair, perhaps 30 guests in total, mostly neighboring ranchers and their families, but it was perfect. Eliza stood at the back, Ruth's shawl draped over her shoulders, and watched as the guests took their seats. She could see Caleb standing near the arbor, looking impossibly handsome in a dark suit, his expression a mixture of nervousness and joy. When his eyes found hers across the distance, his face transformed with such raw emotion that her breath caught. "Ready?" Mrs. Henderson asked, appearing at her elbow. "More than ready." Maggie went first, walking carefully down the makeshift aisle with a basket of flower petals that she scattered with great concentration. Then it was Eliza's turn, and suddenly she was moving forward, each step bringing her closer to the future she'd fought so hard to reach. Caleb's eyes never left her face. When she reached him, he took her hands in his, and she felt the slight tremor in his fingers, the thundering of his pulse against her palm. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of words and promises. The traveling minister spoke about love and commitment and the courage it took to begin again after loss. Eliza heard herself saying, "I do," in a voice that was steady and sure. She heard Caleb's response, deep and resonant with conviction. And then he was sliding a simple gold band onto her finger to rest beside his grandmother's ring, and she was doing the same for him, and the minister was pronouncing them husband and wife. "You may kiss your bride." Caleb cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "Hello, Mrs. Rowan." "Hello, Mr. Rowan." The kiss was gentle but thorough, a promise and a celebration all at once. When they finally broke apart, Maggie was tugging on Eliza's skirt. "My turn. I want to hug Mama Eliza too." Eliza scooped her up, Caleb's arm coming around both of them, and for a moment they stood there as a family while their guests applauded. The sound seemed to echo across the grasslands, carried on the warm wind, a declaration of joy that refused to be contained. The celebration that followed was simple but heartfelt. Tables had been set up in the yard, laden with food that various neighbors had contributed. There was music from a fiddle player who'd come from town, and dancing on the grass, and children running wild while their parents laughed and talked. It was everything a wedding should be, full of life and hope and community. Eliza found herself passed from guest to guest, accepting congratulations and well wishes, answering questions about her plans for the house, and whether she'd keep cooking for the ranch hands. Through it all, Caleb stayed close, his hand finding hers whenever they were separated, his eyes tracking her movement through the crowd with protective attention. "You're hovering," she teased during a rare quiet moment. "Can you blame me? 6 months ago I was a bitter widower convinced I'd never feel anything again. Now look at me." He pulled her closer, swaying to the music, even though they weren't on the makeshift dance floor. "I'm terrified this is all a dream, and I'll wake up alone again." "It's not a dream. I'm real. This is real, and we're really married." She stood on her toes to kiss him softly. "You're stuck with me now." Best fate I could imagine. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold, the guests gradually began to depart. The ranch hands had discreetly disappeared to the bunkhouse, giving the newly married couple privacy. Mrs. Henderson had taken Maggie inside for a bath and bedtime story, extracting a promise that they'd come say goodnight before she fell asleep. Eliza and Caleb stood together on the porch, watching the last of the sunset fade to twilight. His arm was around her waist, her head resting on his shoulder, and the silence between them was comfortable and full. "Are you happy?" Caleb asked quietly. "Happier than I ever thought I'd be again. You?" "Beyond words." He turned to face her, his hands framing her face. "I need you to know something. I loved Sarah. I'll always love her. She gave me Maggie and years of joy, and that doesn't just disappear. But what I feel for you is just as real, just as deep. You're not a replacement or a consolation prize. You're my second chance, and I don't take that lightly. I know, and I need you to know that I love Thomas, and I'll always be grateful for the time we had. But you're not second best, Caleb. You're exactly right. The person I was supposed to find after I learned what loss felt like. So I'd appreciate what we have even more." They kissed as the first stars appeared overhead, the Wyoming night vast and full of promise around them. When they finally broke apart, Maggie's voice drifted through the open window. "Are they done being mushy yet? I'm getting sleepy." Laughing, they went inside together to tuck in their daughter. Their daughter. What a miraculous phrase that was. Maggie was already in her nightgown, her hair braided, her face scrubbed clean. "Did you have a good day, sweetheart?" Eliza asked, sitting on the edge of the bed while Caleb took the chair. "The best day. Everyone was happy, and the cake was delicious, and I got to stay up late." She yawned hugely. "Are things going to be different now that you're really my mama?" "Some things will be different," Caleb said. "Miss Eliza, Mama Eliza, will be sleeping in my room now instead of the little room off the kitchen. We'll be making decisions together as a family, but the important things won't change. We'll still have breakfast together every morning. We'll still read stories before bed. We'll still love you more than anything in the world." "Okay, that sounds good." Maggie's eyes were already drooping. "I love you, Papa. I love you, Mama Eliza." "We love you too, sweet girl," Eliza whispered, kissing her forehead. "Sleep well." They left the lamp burning low and closed the door halfway, the way Maggie liked it. In the hallway, Caleb took Eliza's hand and led her toward the master bedroom. Their bedroom now, she realized with a flutter of nerves and anticipation. The room had been transformed since the last time she'd seen it. Fresh linens on the bed, wildflowers in a vase on the dresser, candles casting soft light across the walls. Someone, probably Mrs. Henderson, had thought of everything. "I'm nervous," Eliza admitted. "Isn't that silly? We're married. I shouldn't be nervous." "I'm nervous too." Caleb closed the door behind them, his back against it, his eyes never leaving her face. "This room was Sarah's domain for so long. I haven't changed anything since she died. Until today, that is. Mrs. Henderson helped me pack away Sarah's things this morning, not throwing them out, just storing them for when Maggie's older and might want them. I wanted this to be our space. Fresh start. That must have been hard. It was. But it was also right. Time to stop living in a shrine to the past and start building our future." He moved toward her slowly, giving her time to object, to set boundaries. "We don't have to do anything tonight. We can just sleep. There's no rush." But Eliza was done with caution, done with holding back out of fear. She reached up to remove the pins from her hair, letting it fall in waves around her shoulders. "I don't want to wait. I want to start our life together right now." The kiss that followed was different from their earlier ones. Deeper, more urgent, full of 6 months of longing finally given permission to bloom. They helped each other out of their wedding clothes with fumbling fingers and breathless laughter, learning the geography of each other's bodies with wonder and tenderness. Eliza's scars from the fire stood out pale against her skin, and Caleb traced them gently. "Beautiful. Every part of you is beautiful. They're ugly. They're proof that you survived, that you fought for us. How could they be anything but beautiful?" He kissed each scar carefully, reverently, until she believed him. Their lovemaking was slow and sweet, a conversation conducted in touches and sighs, two people learning to be whole again by becoming part of something larger than themselves. When they finally lay tangled together, breathless and complete, Eliza felt as if some final piece of herself had clicked into place. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too. Forever and always." They fell asleep wrapped around each other, the windows open to let in the night breeze, the sounds of the ranch a lullaby around them. The weeks and months that followed brought their share of challenges. The town didn't universally embrace their marriage. There were still those who whispered that Eliza had trapped Caleb, that she was an opportunist taking advantage of a grieving man. Victoria Campbell made her disapproval known through conspicuous absence at community gatherings and the occasional cutting remark. But there were triumphs too. The new barn was completed by October, larger and safer than the one that had burned. The garden yielded a bountiful harvest that Eliza spent happy hours preserving for winter. Maggie thrived under the love of two parents, her nightmares about abandonment gradually fading as security took root. On a crisp November morning, Eliza realized her monthly courses were late. She said nothing at first, afraid to hope, but when another week passed, she confided in Mrs. Henderson. "Could be nothing. Could be stress or your body still healing from the burns," the older woman said. Or it could be a baby. How would you feel about that? Terrified, excited, all of the above. Eliza pressed a hand to her still flat stomach. We haven't talked about more children. Caleb might not want. That man would be over the moon, but you should tell him soon. These things have a way of showing themselves. She chose that evening after Maggie was asleep and they were sitting together in front of the fire. Her hands were shaking as she took his. I need to tell you something. I'm not certain yet, but I think I might be. The words wouldn't come. Caleb's eyes went wide. Are you pregnant? Maybe. Probably. I think so. For a moment he just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then joy broke across his face like sunrise. Truly? Truly. Are you happy about it? I know we didn't plan. He silenced her with a kiss that left no doubt about his feelings. Happy doesn't begin to cover it. Another child. Our child. Eliza, do you know what this means? What? It means life is starting over. Really starting over. Not just going through the motions or trying to recapture what was lost, but genuinely building something new. He placed his hand over hers on her stomach. When do you think? Early summer, if I'm right about when it happened. Maggie is going to lose her mind with excitement. They told her the next morning at breakfast, and Caleb's prediction proved accurate. Maggie shrieked with joy, bouncing in her chair, asking a million questions about names and whether it would be a boy or girl, and when she could tell her friends at school. Can we name it Sarah if it's a girl, after Mama? Eliza and Caleb exchanged glances. How would you feel about Sarah as a middle name? Eliza suggested. That way the baby would carry your mama's name, but also have their own identity. Maggie considered this seriously. That's good. And if it's a boy, can his middle name be Thomas? After your husband who died? The thoughtfulness of it brought tears to Eliza's eyes. Yes, sweetheart. That would be perfect. Winter arrived with snow that blanketed the ranch in white silence, making the house feel even cozier and more enclosed. Eliza's pregnancy progressed normally despite the doctor's concerns about her still healing injuries. She grew round and uncomfortable, but Caleb treated her like spun glass, constantly worried she was doing too much. I'm pregnant, not fragile, she protested one afternoon when he insisted she sit down instead of kneading bread. You're carrying our child and you nearly died 6 months ago. Forgive me for being cautious. I love you for worrying, but I also need you to trust that I know my own limits. They found a balance, as they seemed to with everything, him hovering protectively, her accepting help without surrendering her independence. Maggie appointed herself assistant mother, constantly checking on Eliza and talking to her belly about all the wonderful things they'd do together when the baby arrived. Spring came early that year, the snow melting to reveal green grass and early wildflowers. Eliza's garden was planted with Maggie's help, and they added new sections for vegetables they hadn't tried before. The ranch prospered under Caleb's management, and he began making plans to expand the herd. On a warm June evening, while Caleb was out checking the fence line and Maggie was at a friend's ranch for a sleepover, Eliza's water broke. Mrs. Henderson, who'd agreed to stay through the birth, sent one of the ranch hands racing to find Caleb and another to fetch the doctor from town. The labor was long and difficult, Eliza's scarred back muscles making it harder to push, her endurance tested by hours of contractions. But when dawn broke on a new day, she held a squalling, healthy baby boy with dark hair and his father's gray eyes. Caleb arrived just in time, bursting into the room wild-eyed and disheveled, and stopped dead at the sight of his wife and newborn son. Eliza, are you? We're perfect. Come meet your son. He approached almost reverently, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed to look down at the tiny, red-faced infant. He's beautiful. You're beautiful. I can't believe. His voice broke. Thank you. For this. For everything. What should we name him? Eliza asked softly. They discussed names for months without reaching a conclusion. But looking at her husband's face, seeing the mixture of grief and joy there, the acknowledgement that this child was both a new beginning and a tribute to everything they'd survived, Eliza knew. What about James Thomas? James for something completely new, and Thomas for the man who came before. Caleb's eyes filled with tears. Perfect. James Thomas Rowan. Maggie met her baby brother that afternoon and declared him the best present she'd ever received, better even than the new pony Caleb had promised her for her birthday. She held him carefully, her young face serious with responsibility. "I'll protect him," she announced, "like Mama Eliza protected me. I'll be the best big sister ever." "I know you will," Eliza said, her heart so full she thought it might burst. The months that followed were chaotic and exhausting, and more joyful than Eliza had imagined possible. James was a good baby, sleeping in longer stretches than she dared hope, and Maggie was indeed a devoted big sister. Caleb proved to be a doting father, often found in the nursery in the middle of the night, rocking his son and singing softly. By the time James was 6 months old and autumn was painting the grasslands in gold and amber again, Eliza stood on the porch one morning and marveled at how much had changed in just over a year. She'd arrived at this ranch broken and desperate, expecting nothing more than a place to hide from her grief. Instead, she'd found a family, a home, and a love that had transformed her from a woman simply surviving into one fully, vibrantly alive. The sound of horses approaching drew her attention. A wagon was coming up the drive, and as it drew closer, she recognized Ruth Campbell at the reins, but beside her sat Victoria. Eliza's stomach clenched with old anxiety, but she forced herself to remain calm, to wait and see what this visit would bring. Ruth climbed down first, then turned to help her daughter. Victoria looked thinner than Eliza remembered, her face drawn but her expression lacking the hostility it had held before. "Mrs. Rowan," Ruth said formally, "we hope we're not intruding. We wanted to bring a gift for the baby. We heard you had a boy." "You're not intruding at all. Please, come in. I just made coffee." They followed her into the kitchen, Victoria moving stiffly, as if she'd rather be anywhere else. Eliza poured coffee and set out fresh cookies, and for a moment they all sat in awkward silence. Finally, Victoria spoke, her voice quiet and surprisingly lacking in edge. "I came to apologize. I've been uncharitable toward you, cruel even. I convinced myself you were stealing something that belonged to me, but the truth is, Caleb was never mine to lose." She looked up, meeting Eliza's eyes directly. "I've spent the past year nursing my bitterness, and it's made me miserable. Mother finally made me see that the only person my anger was hurting was myself." "I appreciate you saying that," Eliza said carefully. "It took courage to come here. I also wanted to say that I see now what Caleb saw in you. You're good for him. Good for Maggie. This house is alive in a way it hasn't been since Sarah died." Victoria smiled, and it was genuine if a bit sad. "I hope we can be civil to each other at least. For the community's sake, if nothing else." "I'd like that." After they left, Eliza stood in the kitchen, Ruth's gift, a beautiful hand-knitted baby blanket, in her hands, and felt something release in her chest. Forgiveness wasn't weakness, she realized. It was strength. The ability to let go of old hurts and move forward was what allowed life to continue, to grow, to flourish. That evening, with Maggie helping her make dinner and James cooing in his cradle and Caleb due home any minute, Eliza looked around the kitchen that had become her kingdom and felt profound gratitude. This wasn't the life she'd imagined when she was young and naive and thought she had everything figured out. It was better, deeper, richer, earned through struggle and loss and the courage to keep hoping even when hope seemed foolish. The front door opened and Caleb's voice called out, "Something smells amazing!" Maggie abandoned the potatoes she'd been peeling and ran to greet him. "Papa, guess what? Mama Eliza let me crack the eggs all by myself and I only got a tiny bit of shell in them." "That's my girl. Where's your brother?" "Sleeping, as usual. Babies are boring. When will he be old enough to play?" Caleb appeared in the kitchen doorway, Maggie riding on his shoulders, and the love in his eyes when he looked at Eliza still had the power to make her breath catch. "How was your day, Mrs. Rowan?" "Eventful. Victoria Campbell came by to apologize." His eyebrows rose. "Really? How did that go?" "Better than I expected. I think we'll be able to be civil to each other now, at least." "Good. I'm glad." He lifted Maggie down and crossed to where Eliza stood, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. "You're amazing. You know that? Taking the high road when you had every right to slam the door in her face." "Bitterness doesn't serve anyone. Besides, I have too much to be happy about to waste energy on old grudges." They stood like that for a moment, watching Maggie return to the potatoes with exaggerated care, James sleeping peacefully in his cradle, the kitchen warm with the smell of cooking food and the promise of dinner together. This, Eliza thought, was what home really meant. Not a place, but people. Not perfection, but presence. Not the absence of grief, but the courage to find joy alongside it. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you more," Caleb murmured back. "I love you both most," Maggie called without looking up. "And I love James too, even though he's boring." Their laughter filled the kitchen, spilling out into the rest of the house, chasing away the last shadows of loneliness that had once made these rooms feel so empty. The young widow who'd arrived under the wide Wyoming sky with nothing but a carpet bag and fragile hope had become a woman who knew her own strength, who'd learned that hearts broken by loss could heal and love again, and who'd discovered that sometimes the best families were the ones you chose, or the ones that chose you. Years later, when Maggie was grown with children of her own, she would tell them stories about the summer her father married the cook who saved her life. She'd tell them how her stepmother had run into a burning barn without hesitation, how she'd turned their house into a home again, how she'd taught them all that love didn't divide. It multiplied. And she'd tell them that the secret to happiness wasn't avoiding grief or pain, but learning to build joy in spite of it, alongside it, because of it. But tonight, on this ordinary evening in late autumn, Eliza didn't know what the future held beyond the simple certainty that she would face it with Caleb beside her and their children around them. That was enough, more than enough. It was everything. As they sat down to dinner together, their family, imperfect and beautiful and real, Eliza silently thanked both Sarah and Thomas for the love they'd shared and the lessons they'd taught about holding on and letting go. Then she looked at the faces around her table, reached for Caleb's hand and Maggie's, and chose with full awareness and complete joy to be present in this moment, this life, this second chance she'd been blessed enough to find beneath the endless Wyoming sky. And she knew, with the certainty that comes from surviving loss and choosing to love anyway, that they were all going to be more than just okay. They were going to be happy. Not every day, not perfectly, but genuinely and truly happy in the way that only people who've known darkness can appreciate light. The young widow had come to cook for the rich rancher, and his daughter had asked her to tuck her in too. In answering that simple request, Eliza had found not just employment, but purpose. Not just shelter, but home. Not just survival, but life abundant and rich with meaning. And in a house that had once echoed with silence and grief, there was now laughter and music and the sound of a family that had been broken, learning, slowly and beautifully, how to be whole again.